7. This is your next lesson of your Bible stories, lesson 5. As I've said before, we're not trying to challenge your religious beliefs. All we're doing these Bible stories for is because there are many allusions or references to Bible stories throughout time. Okay, so your key vocabulary today, we're looking at the word parable. Now, a parable is a simple story that is used to illustrate a moral or a spiritual lesson. They sort of give a story a bit of context, and it shows how these stories apply to everyday life. Okay, so for example, if you think about the boy who cried wolf, he kept saying that the wolf were after his sheep. In the end, they were lies, but in the end, the wolf actually did get his sheep. And the moral to that story was that liars won't be rewarded. Okay, the stories often seem quite simple on the surface, but they generally have hidden meanings. So what I want you to do is, using your piece of paper and your pen that I hope you have with you, is can you recall any parables that you have studied so far this year? So if you stop the recording, please, and just jot yourself down some answers. Your next keyword is Samaritan. Now let's have a look and see what that means. Samaritan is a charitable or helpful person. Okay. Now it's also worth sort of pointing out here that we use the term Samaritan as someone who is kind, but also many years ago, there were a group of people that lived in a place called Samaria in biblical times. And it will sort of come up in the story that we're going to be looking at, because we're going to be looking at the story of the Good Samaritan. The Jews and the Samaritans, they actually didn't really get on. There was a lot of politics involved, and you know, if you think about feuding gangs, you get one side that doesn't like the other, and it was similar with the Jews and the Samaritans. But as I said before, we do use the term Samaritan as someone who is kind. Okay, so having a look at the question, have you heard of the charity the Samaritans? What might this reveal about the word? I've sort of pretty much given you the answer anyway, so if you take a little bit of time to just jot down your answer. So stop the video now. Your second piece of vocabulary is symbolism. So let's have a look at the meaning. Symbolism is the use of symbols to represent ideas or qualities. Now, how might symbolism be similar to a metaphor? Okay, so take your time to jot yourself down an answer. Stop the video now, please. Okay, I'm not sure what you've got written down, but a metaphor is, it draws comparisons between one object to another. So, for example, if you think about a typical teenager's bedroom, particularly when I think about what my children used to be like when they were teenagers, their bedroom often resembled a bomb site. So their bedroom was a bomb site. So what it's doing, it's creating that image for you of just how messy it was. You know, the room was like an explosion of all of their stuff everywhere, particularly where it shouldn't have been. Okay. A symbol, there are some similarities between the two. A symbol, on the other hand, is often used as a piece of, it sort of represents a theme. So, for example, a rose, if you see a rose throughout a story, it could actually be symbolic of romance. A dog, for example, if that keeps cropping up, if that's this symbol of a dog throughout, it actually could be represent loyalty or devotion. So hopefully you've got something similar to that. Okay. Now, your knowledge goal today is to identify the moral message of the Good Samaritan and to analyse its significance today. Now, morals are something that your conscience usually guides you, so you understand the difference between right or wrong. And your steps to success are, skipped over. By the end of the lesson, you'll know the story of the Good Samaritan, the moral message of the story, and how this has influenced society since. So, parables. As we know, a parable, as we've already said, is a simple story that is used to illustrate a more moral or spiritual lesson. The Bible is full of parables with moral messages to teach Christians how God wants them to behave and treat others. Just have a think about the following question. Do you think parables are still relevant today? So stop the video and just have a little think about that and see if you can think about any reasons why you think they are or aren't relevant. Okay, now you're going to be looking at the video of the Good Samaritan, then I'm going to read the story to you. Now, as I've said, that throughout time there are allusions to the Bible with regards to the stories that are told. Now, for this one, the Good Samaritan, just as an example, you may or may not be familiar with the story Les Miserables. You may have seen the film, very good film. I haven't read the story or the play. So anyway, the story is about a man called Jean Valjean, who he's the main protagonist. And if you've seen the film, it's actually played by Hugh Jackman in one of the versions anyway. And what this Valjean does, he actually robs a parish priest. And the priest not only covers his crime to the police, so he doesn't tell the police what has happened, but instead he offers him more. And it's this act of kindness from the priest that actually turns Valjean into a hero, as he becomes a good Samaritan himself and helps other characters in the story. So as you see, you know, this is reference to the story of the Good Samaritan. So what I'd like you to do is either click on the link or copy and paste the link that you probably be given by your teacher, copy it into a browser and watch that film, please. And as you're watching, can you please make some good notes about the story of the Good Samaritan? Now what we're going to do is read the story and add to your notes. Now you've seen that story, you might be able to think of some, you know, some of your own Good Samaritan stories that you may have read or films that you've seen, and sort of link them to this. Let's have a look. The next parable started with a man asking Jesus a question. The man who asked Jesus a question was very smart. Maybe he was trying to trick Jesus and see if he was a good teacher or not. This is what he asked. Teacher, what should I do so I can go to heaven and live forever? Jesus replied, what is written in the Bible? What do you think? The man answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. That's right, Jesus said. Do this and you will live forever in heaven. But the man wanted to know more, so asked Jesus, and who is my neighbour? Jesus decided to answer this question with a parable to help everyone who was listening to understand. Jesus said, there was once a Jewish man walking along a road. He was coming from Jerusalem, was heading to Jericho, which was a full day or two of walking. The road was rocky and there were small hills all around. The man was just humming to himself and enjoying the nice day when suddenly a group of men jumped out from behind a hill. They took all his belongings and tore off most of his clothes. They didn't want him to follow them, so they beat him up very badly and left him lying and bleeding on the side of the road. A few minutes later, a priest who was walking down the same path and noticed the man lying on the side of the road. Do you know what he did? You'd think he would run over and help the man. Instead, he crossed the road and walked on the other side and acted like he didn't see the man. About an hour or so later, another man called a Levite was walking down the road. Levites were people who assisted priests with their work. He would probably help the man, but do you know what he did? He slowed down and walked a little closer to the man, but then kept walking without helping him at all. You might be thinking that maybe the man lying on the side of the road looked like he was resting or something, and that's why the priest and the Levite didn't stop to help. The trouble is, it was easy to tell he was badly hurt. The man was bleeding, had most of his clothes ripped off him, and he was bruised and hardly breathing. The road was rocky, and there were small hills all around. The man was just humming to himself and enjoying the nice day, when suddenly a group of men jumped out from behind a hill. Oh, I think I must have gone backwards, sorry. Just a few minutes later, another man came walking. He was a Samaritan. One thing you should know about Samaritans is that Jews didn't like them. Jews usually didn't treat Samaritans very well, so they never got along. So if you remember what I said to you before, that Samaritans were people during biblical times that lived in a place called Samaria. So think of them as like opposing gangs. The man who was dying on the road was a Jew. So what do you think the Samaritan did? You would think he would walk by and maybe even laugh at the man. But as soon as he saw the man, he went over to him and felt compassion for him. Compassion is when you feel kindness and love for that person and you want to help. He put bandages on his sores and poured oil and wine, which were quite expensive, on the sores to prevent them from getting worse. Then he lifted the man on his own donkey and took him to a hotel to take care of him. The next day, the Samaritan took out enough money so that the man could stay at the hotel until he was well enough to leave. He paid the man at the front desk and asked him to take care of the man. If he wasn't better after about 2 months, the Samaritan would come back and pay for any extra cost. After Jesus finished the story, he asked, "Which of the 3 men do you think was a neighbour to the man who was left beaten on the side of the road?" The man who asked him the question at the beginning replied, "The one who had compassion and helped him." Jesus told him, "Go and do the same." So when they're talking about neighbour, they're talking about your fellow human beings. Now, one thing with the priest and Levite, you might have assumed that they would have stopped and helped the man themselves. But I think with the priests and the Levites, part of their beliefs was, if they thought that the man may have been dead, it was to keep themselves spiritually clean. So that is possibly a reason why they didn't help the man, okay? Because it does seem very unkind and very incompassionate not to actually have stopped, okay? But it was very magnanimous, a very good thing to do for the Samaritan to actually stop and help the Jew, okay? Now have a look at this. Do you think the moral message of the Good Samaritan is still relevant today? What I want you to do is you're going to be writing an analysis to answer this question. It'll only just be a paragraph or 2. Now, to analyse something is to examine something in detail, typically in order to explain and interpret it. So we've got a couple of synonyms which are words that can be used instead of analysis, and they are to examine or inspect. So that's what we mean by analysis, to examine something. So here's the question again today. If you write the question down on your piece of paper. So do you think the moral message of the Good Samaritan is still relevant today? Now, when it comes to being a Good Samaritan, I think a lot of us all have good intents, But actually to act on something like this is often better than just to have the intention of something. So when you're writing your answer, thinking about what you've seen and what I've just read to you, and maybe even any examples that you might have as well, maybe examples of your own, examples through literature, you know, they could come from anywhere. You could start your answer with the following sentence. The term Good Samaritan today refers to a person who helps others in a random act of kindness. So we're explaining what that term means. Now, what I want you to do, you can use these sentence starters or any sentence starters of your own. It's entirely up to you. So the moral message from this story is or isn't relevant today. So you decide whether it is relevant or it isn't relevant. Then you need to explain why it is or why it isn't, okay? And then I'd like you to try to come up with another example and explain, okay, or explore why the story of the Good Samaritan isn't or is relevant today. Again, you can use examples either from the story or from the story or from any other stories that you know or from any examples that you have encountered, okay? Now, I would like you, please, to send this work to your teacher. You can put it onto Teams and they will find it easier to access that way. Finally, Samaritan. Think about your keywords from today. We've got Samaritan and symbolism. So Samaritan. Can you think of any Samaritans from the text that you have read so far this year? And symbolism. How is symbolism used in a parable? So can you think of any symbols that may have been used throughout this story or through any other parables or moral stories that you have read so far? Thank you, Year 7, and please don't forget to send your work to your teacher for today. Thank you.